Hey, it's NPC here. So I've been getting a lot of requests for a Paladin guide that's updated to the Destiny update. And this guide should be good for a while since it seems like Nexon won't update Explorers again anytime soon. Well, unless they revamp them again in another 9 years or so. So if you're watching in 2031, then this guide might be outdated. Anyway, that should be enough for the intro. So if you've got more questions afterwards, I'll answer them in the comments. So the first thing is, how do I make a Paladin? Well, if you're new to the game, it might be confusing because there is no Paladin option in the character creation screen. Well, it's actually under Explorers and it branches out into Paladin from there. So you just go through the Maple Island questline. It's pretty simple after Destiny. Rip the relaxer chair though. I'm probably going to speed this up. When it comes time to pick your class, just select the warrior path, and when you get to second job at level 30, make sure you click Page, since the class branch for Paladin goes from Page to White Knight to Paladin. I'll put it up on the screen right about now. So training, I'll go over what to do at each job advancement, what your main mobbing skills will be, and how to train to level 200 as a Paladin. Now thankfully Paladin isn't too complicated, so its grinding is pretty straightforward. At first job, Slash Blast is your training skill, which will be quickly replaced soon at level 30, so don't worry if you think it sucks. Now onto the mobility skills. War Leap is your standard flash jump skill. Upward Charge is a neat little skill for getting up to platforms that are a bit higher. It serves as a gap closer that can help you train a bit faster. Leap Attack is just a simple downward slash. I personally don't use this skill very often, but it's there, I guess. Iron Body and Warrior Mastery are both just passives that you can max out and forget about. Okay, on to second job. Your main mobbing attack is immediately replaced by Divine Swing. You've also got this skill called Close Combat that pulls monsters closer to you from both sides. It can be useful, but once you start one-shotting, it's kind of useless. Every other skill here is a passive, so you can just max them and forget about it. Oh wait, actually, I should probably talk about Vessel of Light. After Destiny, they made this system a lot simpler, because beforehand, you had to alternate between different elemental charges to stack this up to 5 stacks. But now, since Paladin is purely just a holy based class, you only need to use just one skill. Any ability that is classified as a holy ability will stack this up, which by the way is basically every skill you have. So yeah, it actually is just there in the background. At third job, you get some more cool active skills, but I'll just go over them pretty quickly. Your new mobbing skill, Divine Charge. This replaces Divine Swing from second job. A rush skill that pushes enemies called Rush. Noble Demand is a debuff that reduces enemy defense, which is great for high defense bosses like Chaos Root Abyss. HP Recovery recovers HP, but the more you use it, the less effective it becomes, reducing by 10% each time you spam it within 15 seconds. Parashot Guard is a toggle that gives attack. Turn this on when you log in and you can forget about it. Shield Mastery, Divine Shield, and Achilles make you hella tanky, and they're also all passives. Also, I should probably mention that Divine Shield can help you survive percent HP attacks when it's active, which is what makes it so incredibly OP in endgame bosses, but that's for later. And finally, Combat Orders is the signature Paladin party buff. It increases the limit of 4th job skills by 2 points, which might be the most unique party buff in the game. No other class as of now can do this, and I do hope they keep this ability unique so only Paladins can do this. I know there's decent combat orders that any class can get, but that only increases the skills by 1 point. Finally, at 4th job we have Divine Mark, which buffs the range of Divine Charge and periodically leaves behind an explosion that does even more damage, making your mobbing pretty good. Blast is going to be your main bossing skill that hits a lot of lines, and will be further enhanced by Divine Judgment. Every 5 hits of Blast on an enemy will grant even more hits, so yeah, just spam this when bossing. Heaven's Hammer is your FMA or full map attack skill, and it has a really short cooldown, so you want to be using this as soon as it's off cooldown when you're training. It also has a special feature where you can't be knocked back by super knockback when casting it, as shown here. Maple Warrior and Hero's Will are both straightforward, because every class has those skills, but because of combat orders, Maple Warrior gives 16% all stats instead of 15%, making it slightly better. And Hero's Will's cooldown goes from 360 seconds to 240 seconds, which is pretty huge actually. Divine Blessing is just a final damage buff, and it becomes more useful at 5th job that I will go over later. Guardian is a revive skill. It gives both you and your revived party member 10 seconds of invulnerability. So if you need some invulnerability, you can just grief your party member by reviving them early. High Paladin is your standard passive mastery skill. It gives a whole lot of nice stats. Greater Vessel of Light is a passive buff to your second job skill, Vessel of Light. It's the same thing, but even greater. Am I forgetting something? Oh, alright. Magic Crash. This skill is useless. Next up will be the hyper passives for Paladin. I'll put on screen what I believe are the best 5 hyper passives for Paladin. The reason why I only have the cooldown cutter for Heaven's Hammer is because the Destiny update made it so that it's no longer optimal to use Heaven's Hammer for damage when bossing, so it's purely a training skill now. And since you'll be one-shotting with it anyway because it hits pretty hard, having cooldown cutter is good enough. Now for the hyper skills. Sacrosanctity is a 30-second iframe where you're literally in god mode for 30 seconds. When I say that, I mean it. You can't be hit by anything. It does have a 5-minute cooldown though. You can however cancel the skill early to refund some of the cooldown. It refunds 45 seconds for every 5 seconds remaining on the skill when you cancel it. Smite Shield is your bind skill. It's also a pretty decent mobbing skill since it has pretty good range. What I mean by a bind skill is that when you use it on a boss, they cannot move or perform actions for 10 seconds. And finally, Epic Adventure is a small 10% damage buff, but also applies to any other explorer in your party, and it stacks with theirs as well. Alright, on to the hyper stats. This is what I have currently, but I would say to prioritize normal monster damage and critical damage, since you'll most likely be training a lot. However, if you want, you can make a second preset with more points into boss damage and ignore defense, if you want to take on bosses such as the Chaos Root Abyss ones. So now that you're level 200, what should your priorities be for nodes? I'll show on screen the best node combinations. Your first set should be Blast, Divine Judgment and Divine Mark, and Divine Charge. The second set that I personally use is Heaven's Hammer, Final Attack, and Smite Shield. You can opt for Rush instead of Smite Shield if you find you're using Rush a lot in training, but I personally don't use it at all in my training, so I like Smite Shield more. Now let's get into a detailed look at each 5th job active skill that Paladin has. The first one is called Divine Echo. Now don't be intimidated by its long description. It's actually pretty simple. You're in a party and it picks the closest person to you and links you to them. From there on, any attack that you do will be mimicked through that person, kind of like a shadow partner. Now the cool thing is you can actually share 2 of our buff skills with that one party member you're linked to. The first one is Divine Blessing, which is the 21% final damage buff, which actually gives a lot more than you think. It's essentially a straight up 21% boost to their DPS. The second one is, get this, our 30-second iframe Sacrosanctity. This might be one of the big reasons Paladin is pretty sought after in endgame boss parties. You can let one person in your party attack freely while ignoring all boss mechanics. Now, if you accidentally link with the wrong person, you can switch the party member you're linked with by pressing the key again and selecting the number according to their position in the party HP UI. The next 5th job skill is called Hammers of the Righteous. Each time you accumulate a stack of Vessel Charge, you generate a hammer that spins around you. The small hammers don't do any damage, but when you press the skill, they expand and deal massive amounts of damage continuously for 30 seconds. Since this skill has a 60-second cooldown, having this be a 50% uptime is pretty good actually. It makes your mobbing incredibly self-sufficient. The next 5th job skill is probably one of my favorites. Grand Guardian is a key down skill, meaning you need to be pressing the key for the entire 6-second duration that the skill is active. It does a ton of hits on the enemy and will be your main burst bossing skill. While you're holding down the key, you ignore additional defense and gain super stance. This skill is also very well paired with the Angelic Buster Link skill, as well as several Tower of Oz burst rings like Weapon Jump, Ring of Restraint, and Risk Taker. And finally, the Marvel fan in me is happy this skill is named what it is. It's Mighty Mjolnir, just like Thor. You can throw a hammer that bounces to enemies and does lots of damage, and you can hold up to 2 charges of this skill at once. The short cooldown of this paired with Heaven's Hammer and Hammers of the Righteous makes Paladin mobbing pretty good. So before we move on to the next section, let's go over some basic training and bossing rotations. For training, I like to just jump around with my spinning hammers while occasionally using Divine Charge and Heaven's Hammer to clear mobs. I also use Mighty Mjolnir to reach places that I probably won't be able to reach normally. I just go in a circle and rinse and repeat. For bossing, I will go over what kind of skills you should press when bursting, as well as DPSing normally. In terms of bursting, you want to make sure you have all 5 Vessel Charges up. If you're not sure, just use Blast a couple of times to make sure it's at 5 stacks. Afterwards, make sure you debuff the boss with Noble Demand to reduce their defense. Then, proceed to press in this order: Divine Echo, Epic Adventure, Maple Goddess Blessing, Angelic Buster Link, and any Oz rings that you're using. Immediately use Smite Shield to lock the boss in place. Then what comes next is the best part, when you hold down Grand Guardian and just unleash a barrage of hits. After that burst is over, just keep spamming Blast while occasionally throwing a Mjolnir here and there. Then rinse and repeat after all your cooldowns are back up. Now, perhaps the most popular question I get is what weapon combination should I use? Since Paladins have 4 different choices they can go for. You can do one-handed sword plus shield, one-handed mace plus shield, two-handed sword plus rosary, or two-handed mace plus rosary. This is what I think you should do. If you play in Reboot, you should go for a two-handed sword or mace. And if you play on regular servers, you should go for one-handed sword or mace. This is because since there is no scrolling in Reboot, having a shield there isn't as effective as having a shield in regular servers. Now you're probably wondering, okay, I've decided if I want to go one-handed or two-handed, but what about the difference between a sword and a mace? Well, if you look here in your 4th job skill, High Paladin, it states the differences you get when equipping the different weapons. In short, sword gives 1% more critical damage, and mace gives 10% more ignore defense. Which one is better, you ask? Well, it really depends on what you prefer. The difference is pretty minimal though, so it doesn't really matter honestly. Okay, the reason why I put invulnerability right after weapon choice is because it directly ties into that. If you're using a one-handed weapon, the best invulnerability you can get as the first line is 20% boss damage. If you're using a two-handed weapon, instead you'd want +1 attack speed. This is to make up for the slightly slower attack speed that two-handed weapon users have. But two-handed weapons do have a higher attack multiplier, so it makes up for the lost 20% boss damage. Now for the second and third lines, they can be any combination of the following: 21 attack, 20% critical rate, 8% damage to status, or even 15% drop or missile bonuses. It really depends on what you need. It's time for link skills. Since after Destiny we now have link skill presets, what this means is you can now set up different link skill setups that have different purposes. I personally have 3 setups, as shown here. The first one is my bossing setup, the second one is my training setup, and the last one is the one I use for content such as Mulan Dojo, Shirenian Culvert, or just any DPS test content that doesn't require me to have the resistance link skill. There are a ton of link skill guides out there, so you can go check those out. If there's any link skill here that you're not sure of what class they are, just leave a comment down below. Now onto the Legion setup. This is more of a general Legion setup since most classes want the same things in their Legion. Similar to link skills, I'd have a bossing preset and a training preset. The bossing preset consists mainly of critical damage, ignore defense, and boss damage. The training one consists of critical damage, bonus EXP, and normal damage, which increases the damage you deal to normal non-boss monsters. And that's pretty much it for what I believe is a pretty comprehensive guide to the post-Destiny Paladin. Again, if I missed anything, just ask in the comments and I'll do my best to help you out. Cheers.